My name is Alex Seeskin from the University of Chicago. Work, as mentioned before, in the To and Through project, which is based out of the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research. And we do a lot of work at the University of Chicago around attainment and how far students are getting, and grade data and attendance data, and how we can use, how important those data are, and how we can use those data to help schools with their strategy efforts and help them monitor students in more effective ways. I'll talk a little bit just about the high-level research from the consortium that sort of undergirds our project. But over the last year, we've been working with the School District of Philadelphia, in particular ERA, and Lucas Westmus will come up and talk about two of the data tools that the district has designed with our support. And then finally, Nicole Lee, a principal at Franklin Learning Center, will come up and talk about how she's used each of these tools so far this year to improve the outcomes, in particular grades and attendance for her students. So as I mentioned, a lot of our work at the consortium and the To and Through project is grounded in this notion that grades are the most important indicator we have of future success. And so you can see here on this graph, this is all CPS graduates, and it's all CPS graduates, importantly, with between an 18 and a 20 on the ACT. So these are all students with the same ACT scores. And the percentages there are their likelihood of graduating college in 6 years with a bachelor's degree. And you can see the dramatic difference in outcomes. Again, all of these students have the same ACT score. You can see the dramatic difference in outcomes based on their graduating unweighted high school GPA. So if you have a 2.4 or below, your chances of graduating with a bachelor's degree are roughly 1 in 4, 1 in 5. But if you have a 3.5 or above in CPS, even if you have between an 18 and 20 on the ACT, your odds of graduating with a bachelor's degree are in upwards of 3 and 4. And so these dramatic changes raise a really important question for us, which is, if GPA is this incredibly important indicator of our students' future success, how can we use that indicator and start to move more of our work to focus around that indicator as opposed to standardized test scores, which aren't nearly as well linked with future outcomes? The other place that our research points, and I know this has been talked a lot about today, so I won't go into it in detail, but is just the incredible importance of 9th grade, of the 8th to 9th grade transition, and just how important that is for students in Chicago and students in Philadelphia. So one of the things that we note about the importance of freshman year is that students' GPAs after freshman year don't tend to change very much. We don't see a lot of variation after freshman year in students' GPA. So if you have this group of students, are all students who at the end of freshman year had above a 3.0 GPA. So at the end of the freshman year, they were on track, they were passing all their classes, and they had a 3.0 GPA. And their odds of graduating with a 3.0 GPA were 67%. So if you ended freshman year in Chicago Public Schools with above a 3.0 GPA, your odds of graduating with a 3.0 GPA were 67%. The next group we'll take a look at are students who had below a 3.0 GPA, but were on track at the end of 9th grade. They were passing all of their core courses at the end of 9th grade, which we know is a really important indicator of high school graduation. For these students, so again, they're passing their classes, they've just got below a 3.0 GPA at the end of freshman year, only 6% of them graduated with a 3.0 GPA. And finally, for students who were off track, who were failing at least one class, one of their core classes, those students in Chicago Public Schools have a 0% chance of graduating with a 3.0 GPA. And if I just remind you really quickly of the importance of a 3.0 GPA in future outcomes, that's just a critical marker. Like, it's a critical marker in terms of Below a 3.0 generally means a less than 50% chance of earning a bachelor's degree. Above a 3.0 means a higher than 50% chance of earning a bachelor's degree. And a lot of that we know really at the end of freshman year. Like a lot of that is set in stone in many ways at the end of freshman year. And one of the reasons that freshman year is so important is that we see almost all of the markers of student performance decrease in their transition to high school. So you'll see here the dark red are students' GPAs in 8th grade. The pink are their GPAs in 9th grade. These are all the same students. So they're the same students, just with 8th grade GPAs and 9th grade GPAs in Chicago Public Schools. And you can see across all subject areas, students' GPAs decline. Sometimes people say, well, but maybe it's just the students at the top or just the students at the bottom in terms of their incoming GPAs. We can see here it's true for everyone, essentially. The box that you see there are students' 9th grade GPAs. So on the far left, those are students with between a 3.5 and a 4.0 in 8th grade. And the pink box there is their 9th grade GPA. And so you can see for all of these different groups of students, their GPA declines. And part of the reason that this happens is that when students are in middle schools or elementary schools, they're in, generally speaking, small schools, generally speaking, schools that serve their neighborhoods, schools with students that they know and have been with in many cases for 8 or 9 years, and also schools where they have the same adults. They know the same adults. They've built these relationships. And then all of a sudden, when they transition to 9th grade, they go to, generally speaking, larger schools that are further away from their homes, where they know fewer students and far fewer adults. And so part of our work with the School District of Philadelphia this year has been, if we know these things, how can we work with high schools to use GPA and attendance? Attendance is a really important predictor of GPA. How can we use GPA and attendance to better work with schools to help them use that data, both historical data and quarterly data and real-time data, to help them monitor different groups of students and strategize how to help those different groups of students at a little bit of a higher level. I'm going to turn it over now to Lucas, who's going to talk about what those data systems look like.
Okay, thank you, Alex. My name is Lucas Westphal. I'm a senior associate at the District Performance Office here in the school district. The reason that I'm up here today is because I was the point person on translating a lot of the work that Chicago did into data systems for the School District of Philadelphia. Now there's 2 primary data systems. One of those is, both of them are entirely internally facing, meaning central office staff and principals and assistant principals generally have access to them. So let's just get started here. Number one of the challenges, the work that Alex was talking about was based on a on-track definition that doesn't actually work exactly for Philadelphia public school system. One of the biggest reasons why is that now their definition says that you're on track if you are failing no more than 1 semesterly course. It works for Chicago because in Chicago there are credits associated with semesterly courses, but that's not the case in Philadelphia, with some small exceptions, but for the vast majority of courses you're not getting credits at the semester level. Ted, if you were at the first high school presentation this morning, Ted did a thorough presentation of the translation for this, but we ended up on this definition that says a first-time 9th grader in SDP is considered on track if he or she is earning at least 1 credit in each of the 4 core subject areas, English, Math, Science, and Social Studies, and then 1 additional credit. Now, the additional credit could be another math class. It could be, a world language course, or it could just be a straight elective, not something that doesn't count towards a specific graduation requirement, but is still a credit that counts towards the 23.5 credits students need to graduate. Ted did a much more thorough job of this morning, but just to reiterate, Chicago's definition works very well for them. This definition is also very strongly predictive of on-time graduation in Philadelphia. So here, for example, we see with the 9th grade cohort that, just taking the furthest left side, the 9th grade cohort that entered in 2011-2012, Students who were not on track graduated on time at about a 49% rate, while students who ended their freshman year on track, about just under 90% of those students graduated on time. So this measure is very predictive of graduation 4 years down the line. Okay? So after this, my task and my office's task with this data was to create a way to allow principals and other practitioners to see how that applies to their school and identify ways for them to intervene with students where interventions were necessary. Part of that was expanding the definition of on track from beyond just ninth grade to later grades as well. And I will say, while the ninth grade definition is very much set in stone, the other ones aren't necessarily 100%, although I would say they're close. The logic for ninth grade is sort of carried on for 10th and 11th grade. For 10th grade, it's, again, you just need to get another credit in each of the core courses, and at least 1.5 credits in what we call graduation requirements. Now, this does not mean it's an elective. What it means is that it's a course that counts towards a specific requirement, meaning world language, arts and humanities, health, and physical education. And then a total, if you add that up, you'll see, 4 times 2 is 8 plus 1.5 is 9.5, but you need 11 in order to be promoted, so at least 1.5 credits besides that. I won't do the math for 11th grade, but in this case, we're talking about 3 credits in each of the core subject areas, 3.5 in the other graduation requirements, and 17.5 total. The definition of 12th grade on track just means you fulfilled the graduation requirement, so there's no need to parse it out that way. Okay, so these next few slides are going to be some demonstration data, some more or less false data that we took from our internal system. So this isn't available publicly, but this is some of the views that principals have access to. We combined grades data and credits data into the same application for all of the reasons that Alex was just talking about. Being on track is important, but the way that you're on track also matters quite a bit. I'll actually start on the right side, counterintuitively. The right side is showing the percent of students who, in high school at these sample schools, that were on track for graduation in 4 years. The number at the top, the 78.8, that's telling us that 78.8% of these students are fulfilling the requirements as we've defined them. But down at the bottom, it's also giving a breakout by grade level. And that little gray dot that you can see in the center of each bar is showing where that grade level was last year. Okay, so you're able to look at this chart and very quickly see what your trend is. You notice that there's a blue and an orange there. The blue is showing the percent who are on track with A's and B's. The orange is showing the percent who are on track with C's and D's. Again, for the same reason that for all of the reasons that Alex was talking about, that really does matter for your likelihood of succeeding in college. So this is just an example of some of the data that we have internally facing. Over on the left side is showing the percent of students who are earning all A's and B's in their core courses. For these sample schools, that's 40.7%. One thing that's just mathematically notable, I think, is that you'll notice that the lowest grade, the lowest subject at the bottom, where we have a grade distribution for each of the subject areas. This is probably intuitive, but going in order, red is F's, orange is D's, and then C's, B's, and A's in blue on the right side. The lowest percent of A's and B's is in mathematics. That's at about, looks like at about 52% of students at these schools have either an A or a B in mathematics, but the percent with an A or B in all of their courses is quite a bit lower than that, about 12 percentage points lower than that. That's just a mathematical necessity. If you have, it's not possible for that number to be more than the maximum, more than 52. But you see that a lot of students are only earning a C or a D in one subject area. Okay. Okay, this is one of the, I put this slide up because it's one of the more popular pages among principals. It allows you to get a quick look, actually you can get a quick look, but you can also get a very in-depth look at how students are performing in individual subject areas as well as even in individual subjects. So here, for example, I just put up the distribution for all of the subject areas. If this were the actual system, I could actually click in and essentially dive into English and see what's my grade distribution in English 1 versus English 2 versus English 3. And even from there, I could even go into English 1 and say, what's the grade distribution in Section 1, in Section 2, and Section 3. So this is very useful because it allows principals, it's, to my knowledge, the first time, at least in a while, that we've actually visualized this grades data and put it in front of principals right away so that they can look at this. And, you know, we've heard stories about principals saying, you know, I didn't realize that all but one student was earning a D in this course, or on the flip side, I didn't realize that the worst grade that anybody had in this English course was a 93%, and that one's true. Okay, so besides that, we also do some trend analysis, including by subgroup. This is very hard to read, so I'll just read some of the data off of here. But you can see in the center column, we have two different trend lines that's going by year from 15-16 on the left to 17-18 right now. Now this is boys versus girls. Again, it's sample data, but girls are yellow, boys are blue. On the left side, if this were clearer, you would see that you can also have this show the trends for by race, ethnicity, by grade level, by special education status, by economic disadvantage status, ELL status, and that's not just yes, no, ELL, it's are you currently being served by ELL, have you an exited student, all of those sorts of things, as well as attendance buckets and suspension buckets. So there's a lot of different ways for principals to basically cut this data and self-serve and figure out, you know, where are students struggling. And one more thing before I move on from this, we have found that pages like this that allow you to quickly go through different subgroups can help people pinpoint when something seems particularly off. Now, for example, you know, it's not, you wouldn't be particularly surprised to find out that students with low attendance tend to be off track at a much higher rate. That's not something that should surprise anybody. But, you know, I was working with a principal and we were actually looking at the gender split, and, you know, she found that her excellent on-track rate overall, but essentially I think maybe all but one of her female students was on track, and then almost all of her on-track students were boys, and she's able to sort of start retargeting that data in that way. So I've peppered in a couple examples of how principals have been able to use that data. However, when you're working with students directly, it can get a little bit overwhelming to see all of this data, particularly when it's not associated with individual student names. So sort of recognizing that problem, at the same time as we were developing this application, we developed a what we just call a roster tool. We've been searching for a flashier name for a while, but we haven't come up with one. But it's essentially a roster tool that allows principals to go in and actually view individual student data, get their grades data, as well as their attendance data, and a couple other things. So that's just a sort of a quick and dirty walkthrough of the tool, and I'm going to turn it over to Nicole so that she can talk about how she's been able to use this and just the ways that you've implemented this at FLC.
So I say I got drafted into this program because I'm probably always contacting Lucas to figure out how do I get this information? And I'll be honest with you, I haven't figured out how to do this report. It's actually Mr. Gist, my counselor, who emails Lucas and like, okay, we need the latest tool, roster tool. So, and I never know what to call it, so since I now know it's really called the roster tool, I'll be like, okay, Mr. Gist, let's get this roster tool. It is a very helpful form. One of the things that I say, as you know, we've gotten 2 brand new systems this year, the SIS and then ClickBam. So if you're anything like me, data can become very overwhelming after a point, and trying to use both of these systems, it was just like, okay, ClickBam, I will tell you, I am truly that person who goes in and clicks and just sees what I'm gonna get, and at the end of it, it's like, oh, that worked. And the good thing is, whenever you click, nothing can happen, and you can just put it back to where you started at. But this roster tool and ClickBam have provided me with a great deal of information. With ClickBam, like Lucas said, I was able to look at one of my areas of concern, which is my Spanish 2. I have one Spanish 2 teacher. There's a story behind that too, but I have one Spanish 2 teacher, and when I looked at her failure rate, I was like, okay, this is an SOS. I have to figure out what I need to do to make sure. These are my seniors, these are my 11th graders possibly. I need people to graduate. What do I need to do? So that was a red flag. Then I was looking at, my 9th grade and my 12th grade English classes. What's going on? And then looking at the information that Alex was sharing, I was like, oh my God, my teachers need to truly understand what can happen to our students. So that was an eye-opener, and I thank you for that. Even though we're not Chicago, there are probably some great similarities between these school districts. So data has, and I will tell you, first of all, this is my first year as a principal, so it is truly becoming my friend. But this roster tool, it was, and Lucas was able to give it where it was more printer friendly, and I was able to print it out and send it to my teachers and give it to them, where they meet in grade groups to discuss, because you can sort it by grade group. I don't like Excel either, so I get somebody else to do that too. So we sort it by grade group, and then my grade group teachers can look at all the data. And a big thing for our school is attendance, but then you're looking at grades. The one thing that I'm, asking Lucas and them over and over again, because we're high school, we need keystone data. This information only gives you the PSSA data. So, I'm hoping over the summer somebody will come up with this brilliant idea, or some money, whichever one is the problem with not getting it. And then everything, because we try, open up the early warning indicators, open up this, and teachers look at you like, and it becomes too much. But having this one thing to look at, their grades, and like I said, imagine keystone data. Everything in one spot where I can share it with them each quarter to show them where their kids are. And grade groups really did help us talk about our kids, their attendance, and our attendance did go up. I don't know if it's because of that great new SIS system, or did it actually go up? I'm still waiting to see that. But it has, so when I say this was delightful, and it told me, I didn't know I had as many girls as I did. I'm figuring we're probably like a 1.5 ratio boys to girls thing. That's that click bam stuff. I really didn't know that. So I told my people, I'm like, we need some boys in here, because girls are dramatic. So lots of data. No problem, trust me, no problem, I'll be almost done. Lots of data you can grab from these things. And as I said, the one thing that I would say, emailing people and calling Lucas and them, they're great, they work for you. And then two, clicking and click bam, it really is a great tool to use as I figure it out in terms of figuring out trends. Our climate is outstanding this year. Attendance, it's great to figure out for, incentives for kids. And how many teachers you still need to hire, and where's your survey, which I had to send out. We need to get our student surveys out. So as I said, loads of data in one spot, and really able to see your children for who you are. I like to see my kids. Click bam, as he said, is that overarching, this is the whole school. This gives me my kids, because that's how I know them. So this is a great tool. See, that's it. I'm all done.